Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be another recent reads wrap up. I'll talk about the first 10 books that I've read so far in August. Like always, we will start at the lowest and work our way up to the highest rated. And I have a couple of 3-star books that I'll talk about first. So the first 3-star book that I will talk about is The Diviners by Libba Bray. So I did a buddy read of this with Mahalia from Nerd It This Way. So this is a YA urban fantasy that's set in the 1920s. We follow our main character Evie as she's sent off to New York City and must live with her uncle who is obsessed with the occult. And she has a supernatural power. And then there's also this murdered girl with who has a cryptic symbol on her, and Evie thinks that she can use her power to help solve this crime. And then we also have some side characters like Memphis, Theta, and Jericho who all play a part in this overall story, and there's basically just an evil stirring. So I thought that this was a decent read, but it felt way too long for me. I thought it was the most interesting and engaging when it was actually focused on this main murder mystery, but there's some other side plots that just kind of end up meandering, and I didn't really enjoy those that much. So I feel had it been focused on just this main murder mystery and the occult, that would probably be a more of a 4-star read perhaps. But with all these other meandering side parts that I didn't really enjoy, that's definitely the 2-star sections. So overall it ended up being this 3-star read for me. So I did generally like this idea and premise of the story, and just generally the murders and how they tie to the occult. The slang really kind of got on my nerves at times, and this is, I think, a pretty common complaint that I've seen. Some of it was fine, and I didn't mind it because it kind of helps you feel it's actually the 1920s, but others, other slang terms just got to be ridiculously annoying, and constantly having to read just the same phrases over and over again just really got on my nerves. I also didn't particularly care for any of the characters. Evie seems very selfish and kind of annoying, very full of herself. Was not a big fan of her. Jericho was okay as well, but I feel his plot seemed unnecessary and rather strange and not really fitting, I guess. In terms of the other side characters, again, I didn't particularly care for them for the most part. I thought, though I did think that Memphis and Theta were interesting, and they didn't get the most amount of page time, I guess. There's also a romance that's worked in here that I didn't really care for. Overall, I feel this was a decent read, but I don't really feel I want to continue the series. The next 3-star book that I'll talk about is The Banished Queen by Lisbeth Campbell. So this actually just came out August 18th, and I was approved for an ARC through NetGalley. So this is an adult fantasy where we have this cruel king, and the queen has vanished mysteriously. The king claims that it was an assassination attempt, but everybody knows that this is a lie. So we follow one character, Anza, who finds this missing queen's diary, and she ends up joining the resistance and encounters one of the princes who kind of eventually also joins the resistance. So it's basically can they overcome the king, or will their actions kind of doom their country? So I thought that this was a really great idea. I love any sort of resistance plots like this, but I just kind of felt nothing, I guess, while reading it. The characters were kind of just okay, and I didn't really connect with them as much as I hoped. In particular, Anza, I thought had some promise. They kind of built her up in the beginning to be sort of an assassin, but then she ultimately falls kind of flat, I thought. This prince, I can kind of understand where he's coming from, his motivations and everything, but I guess I just wanted more from him. In general, I felt this book had a lot more telling rather than showing. For instance, with the king, we're repeatedly told that he's just really awful, but I didn't really fully believe it. We're not shown that much to, I guess, develop his evilness. A lot of the side characters were kind of meh in general. There are some parts throughout where we get to read snippets of the missing queen's diary and, learn more about what happened to her and her background and everything, and I thought those were actually really interesting, and I would have actually preferred to read a story based on what was going on with the queen. I feel that would have been I don't know, a much stronger tale overall. And I feel like in these particular sections we're shown more about, like, you know, what the king, like how evil he is, rather than told. So I feel like, you know, I could have used more of that sort of tone throughout. In terms of the writing, I thought it was actually quite nice. Like, reading it, I was like, I mean, I enjoy these words, but overall, I just, like, really struggled to get into it. There's also some, like, darker aspects touched upon in here that I did really like. There's, like, interrogations and these truth finders, which seem like really intriguing concepts. But, you know, I think it had a lot of potential to be really interesting, but we just didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time exploring it. Overall, decent read again. I ultimately did want more from it, though. There are some content warnings here for rape, abuse, murder, and suicidal thoughts. So do be aware going into that. So now we move to the 3.5-star reads. And the first book I'll talk about here is Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. So this is a YA urban fantasy that's set in Korea. So we follow one of our main characters, who is a 9-tailed fox, and she feeds on the energy of men. So she's actually half human and uses, like, since she has to, you know, siphon off the energy of people to live, she goes after criminals to do this. One night, she ends up saving this boy, who's our other main character, from a goblin attack in the woods, and she ends up losing her fox bead, which is basically her soul, and which obviously she needs to survive. The main characters kind of get drawn into this feud, and there's, like, this whole star-crossed lovers plot. So I thought this was actually really fun. It felt like a more unique urban fantasy. I particularly enjoyed the setting of Korea, and, you know, it felt very believable that we were there. It was fun to learn more about, like, Korean mythology and food. There's certainly, I think, some aspects of K-dramas that you see in here, and I actually really enjoyed these and the romance that we get. There's a good amount that takes place in a school here, and I don't know, I feel like I tend to enjoy dramas set at high schools for some reason. So I really enjoyed those aspects. In terms of the plot, it didn't entirely go where I thought it might, and I definitely appreciated that. In terms of the pacing, I thought it was pretty evenly paced throughout. There weren't really sections where I was bored or anything like that. I actually liked both of our main characters quite a bit. They both kind of struggle, I think, with feeling like they can fully open up to people, so it's, like, really touching, I guess, to see, like, the friendship and, you know, eventual romance that develops between them. Jahoon, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, the boy, he has, like, a really cute bond with his grandmother that I thought was just, like, super sweet, and I loved it. I loved his grandma. And then Myung, our female character, this 9-tailed fox, she and her mom have kind of a more interesting dynamic. Like, her mom is really aloof and not super, like, doesn't outwardly appear to be super caring, but, you know, ultimately she does care about her daughter, and I liked seeing, I guess, the progression of that throughout the book. Mi-young herself, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing her name right, she has a really good heart, I think, and her intentions are certainly in the right place. I liked seeing her develop from being sort of, like, standoffish to actually having friends and wanting to just, like, I don't know, keep these relationships. There's obviously, like I mentioned with this K-drama thing, there's certainly some drama that results between our two main characters, but I really enjoyed it. And I think the sequel/companion novel to this just came out possibly this week, so I definitely want to check that out as well. The other 3.5-star book that I'll talk about is The Voyages of Sin Rack, the Dapper by A.J. Fitzwater. So I had received this for review from the publisher a few months ago and finally got around to it. But basically it's like, if you're looking for just, like, a super wholesome and cheerful book to read, that's kind of like Redwall, but much more chill and diverse, like, this is definitely going to be it. So this is a collection of, I think, seven stories about a lesbian capybara pirate as she grows up and, like, meets her crew. She goes on treasure hunts and, you know, things like that, her adventures. So there's certainly, like, a really, like, there's a found family element here with, you know, this crew, and everybody feels really welcome. There's a whole bunch of diversity. Like, Cinrak is a lesbian capybara, and she has relationships with both a rat queen and a marmot diva, I believe. There's, like, a transgender chinchilla. There's non-binary critters. What I thought was really interesting, there's, you know, mentions of these various languages that the critters are talking in. There's, like, gender signifiers, and I think generally speaking there's, like, a whole bunch of discussion about, like, pronouns and, you know, what's appropriate and everything. There's some really fun wordplay. There's like one particular thing that stood out to me was like pi rat, like pi dash rat. And it's like a rat pirate, so I don't know. I just thought that was highly entertaining. The main thing that, like, and the reason why I kind of was like, yes, I would love to read this, is because there's a kraken in this book, and the kraken, like, her real name is kind of long and hard to pronounce, but she goes by Agnes, and she is just the best, and I love her so much. So obviously, like, I don't know, that was my favorite part of these stories for sure. So yeah, I don't know, I thought that this was very charming, very wholesome, and very hopeful. I think the author uses they, them pronouns and is from New Zealand. So now we move into the 4-star books. And the first book I'll talk about here is Kitty's Mixtape by Carrie Vaughn. So I requested this from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out October 16th, I believe. So this is a short story collection in the Kitty Norville series, and I've talked about it, I think, a few times before on my channel, but it's an urban fantasy series about a werewolf named Kitty who is a talk show host in Denver. I've really enjoyed this series as a whole. It has completed, but this is kind of like a, you know, collection of short stories that kind of like wraps some stuff up and also introduces some new tidbits, I think. In general, we have some of these stories are more focused on Kitty, and then we also have some that are more focused on some of the side characters. I do recommend reading the series first before jumping into the short story collection, just to get the full impact of it. Some of these stories are really short and like don't really add much. Like some of them are literally just like a couple of pages, but they were just kind of really funny. In terms of the stories, I think I had read 3 of them before in previous anthologies, but the rest were new to me, which is always nice. It's all kind of organized based on, you know, like each story has a different song associated with it, so I thought that was really entertaining. In general, it was really nice to return to this world. I thought it was like a great urban fantasy series to begin with. There's like a boxing story that I really liked. It was probably one of my favorite stories in this collection. And there's like a murder investigation that Rick, who's a vampire, kind of deals with, and just, I don't know. I think there are some hints in a couple of these stories about the long game that a lot of these vampires have been playing is maybe not quite over yet. So I'm kind of hoping that the series will continue, because that would be amazing. Like, I would absolutely love to return to this world. But in general, you know, Carrie Vaughn's writing is really easy to read. It's really funny. I continue to like Kitty still, though again, like, I think in terms of her character development in this short story collection, like, you don't get that much of it because they are shorter stories. But I think, like, if you haven't read the full series first, like, you know, it may not be super impactful for you, but like, I'm already very familiar with Kitty and all of these other side characters, so, you know, like, I feel like old friends, I suppose, and, you know, kind of reading these stories again is just like a little bit more fun stuff to learn about them, I guess. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is This Is Not the Jess Show by Anna Carey. So this comes out November 17th, and I requested this through NetGalley. So this is a YA thriller where we follow a teenage girl, Jess, and her life seems to be like very dramatic. Like every spring, I think it is, something like super crazy goes on. You know, there's like stuff that happens at the talent show, or her friends are setting her up with this really hot guy. Things seem to finally kind of be going her way until one day an iPhone falls out of her friend's backpack, and she's like, what is this? So the problem is, it is 1998, so iPhones have not been invented yet. And so, like, basically her friends don't acknowledge that this has happened, and people start acting really weird. Her dog seems different one day, and basically nothing in this world is quite what it seems. So I actually really enjoyed this. I thought this was decently paced overall and definitely kept me interested. You know, like, there were no dull moments, and I just like wanted to keep going with it. I think it definitely plays on this 90s nostalgia a lot, which I thought was, you know, just great. There's like some, you know, Lisa Frank stickers and stuff like that, which, like, I was a big Lisa Frank girl back in the day and had like a whole bunch of binders and stuff. Really nostalgia for me. In terms of like it being a thriller, I don't know if it was really like full-on thriller, I suppose, but it's really readable. I think it's like a really interesting setting and concept. I'm definitely wondering what has happened in order for society to kind of get to this point. We have a lot of very selfish characters throughout this, but not Jess. I thought she was very genuine. I thought she reacted really realistically to all of the things that we learn throughout the book. She seems actually genuinely nice, and she really cares about her sister Sarah, and I certainly can sympathize with Jess's situation a lot. I think, it is a thriller, and it's better to not know very much going into it. I do think it's a duology, which is interesting. I would definitely read on and, I'm curious to see where this goes, but I do feel satisfied with this ending if you do want to just read this one, I suppose. So I would definitely recommend this if this sounds interesting to you. The last 4-star book I'll talk about is Coldbrook by Tim Lebbon. So I read this for Kasha's 48-hour Ebola-thon, which was, I think, a couple of weekends ago now. I don't know. I don't remember. In North Carolina, there's this lab called Coldbrook, and they have basically built a gateway into a new world. However, zombies come through one day. So they are racing to contain the spread of these zombies and find this immune person in order to make a cure. So I thought this was actually really fantastic. It's definitely a different take on zombies, a zombie apocalypse. Like, there's alternate worlds and this whole multiverse idea. So I thought that was actually really cool, and I really liked how this was implemented. Certainly made for some alarming moments. I also liked how there were some, commonalities or common threads throughout all of these different worlds. There's settings, characters that kind of parallel each other, and also just some characters that appear in multiple worlds that are kind of creepy. The zombies I thought were kind of alarming. They're in this particular world, they are much faster, though in alternate worlds they are slower because they are older. So I thought that was really cool to see, just different settings, how zombies would be acting differently, I suppose. There's certainly a lot of blood and death, but I thought this was really great. I thought it was pretty fast-paced, and I definitely wanted to keep going. It's a almost 500-page book, but I just, really kept wanting to read it. In terms of the characters, there's a whole bunch of unlikable people who make really terrible decisions, but I can respect some of the characters overall. We do have someone who has a chronic illness that's pretty rare, so we see her trying to, manage her illness as well as, this whole zombie apocalypse thing. So I thought that was pretty nice. I don't know if I was really terrified ever, but I was definitely on edge. So one just kind of fun side note, in one of the worlds, zombies come through, and again, this is in North Carolina. Some of the zombies come through because of an earthquake, and I was actually reading this on a day that there was a small earthquake in North Carolina. It originated in the western part, which is where this is supposed to take place. Not exactly the same area, but kind of general western part of the state. So I was kind of just oh my god, what if the zombie apocalypse is happening right now? So that was just kind of a fun side note, and just a fun little reading experience for me. But yeah, in general, I really liked this. If you're looking for a different take on a zombie apocalypse, I would definitely check this out, and I would certainly be interested in trying out more of his books. So now we move to the 4.5-star books, and the first book I'll talk about here is Before Mars by Emma Newman. So this is the third book in this Planetfall series, and they're kind of standalone adult sci-fi books, but really I think it's best to read them in order. So this particular plot, we follow Anna, who goes to Mars on a mission as a geologist and artist, and she's trying to fit in with her team. However, she discovers a note in her own handwriting that says to not trust the psychologist, but she can't remember writing this. She also finds this fake wedding ring and footprints in a place where the AI says no one has visited. So basically it's what is going on here? So I think that this is by far the best in the series yet. This was actually the reason why I wanted to read this series in the first place. I had seen this one first, and I was oh, that sounds really awesome, but I had seen, it's technically book 3. I was okay, I should probably read the other books, and I'm glad that I did, because you kind of get a sense of this world, and a lot of events are referenced, and you'll know more about them if you've read the other books. But you can probably get away just fine reading this as a standalone if you really want, but my personal recommendation is to read the other books. I found this general mystery to be very motivating. I definitely wanted to know what was going on. There's certainly this interesting conflict of whether or not Anna is losing her mind, or if there's actually sinister things afoot. I thought the pacing, it was very fast-paced, definitely easy to read. Anna, I thought, was very complex, and I actually liked her as a main character quite a bit. It seems like she has postpartum depression, which is not something I see in books all that often, so I definitely appreciated the mention of it here and just kind of like the discussion behind, I don't know, postpartum depression. Like, I feel like it's an important topic that kind of just gets shuffled under the rug sometimes. She has this troubled past with her father as well, and we kind of learn more about this relationship as the book progresses. I definitely felt very sympathetic towards her. Like, a lot of the things that she's had to deal with are definitely tough. I really liked how she's both a geologist and an artist, so, you know, she, like, definitely wants to pull her weight as a geologist, so I can certainly, like, respect being a scientist and also having other interests, because that's kind of, like, how I feel. I thought that she was very relatable in that aspect. There's also really great representation here, and this is true of all of Emma Newman's books, particularly in terms of mental health. We also have a non-binary characters from, I think, diverse backgrounds, and it all feels very natural. There's some interesting technology here. You know, it is a sci-fi series, especially this artificial intelligence in this particular book. Whew, interesting stuff. But yeah, so I would definitely recommend this book, but there are some content warnings, obviously, for postpartum depression and abuse. The other 4.5-star book I'll talk about is Binti, the complete trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. So this is an adult sci-fi, and it collects all of these 3 Binti novellas that have already been published, as well as a new short story just for this collection. So we follow Binti, who is a Himba girl, and she gets the chance to go to this Unza university, and she's very skilled at math. So on the way to this university, there's like this alien species that are kind of like jellyfish attack, and she is the only survivor. So she ends up having to kind of like broker like a peace treaty between these aliens and this planet where this university is located to save everybody. You know, some of the other stories are dealing with like bias, survival, and like trying to thrive in these conditions. I thought this was really fantastic. I had actually read the first Binti novella before, and it definitely holds up upon reread. Binti, I think, is a fantastic main character. I obviously love how she's very skilled at math, and it feels almost like her mathematical abilities are almost magical, I suppose. So that's kind of intriguing. She's definitely forced into a really terrible situation, but she, you know, tries to survive and pave the way for the future. I think many people underestimate her, but and like kind of don't take her very seriously. So she has to deal with being looked down upon for, you know, coming from, like, with her background, she's coming from this more like tribal society. You know, people are looking down on her for wanting to leave this lifestyle and go to the university. She obviously she has to try to survive, and then she has this, obviously, relationship with this jellyfish-like alien species because she's, like, been in charge of developing a peace treaty. But she definitely persists throughout all of these hardships. She struggles with PTSD from this, you know, massacre on the ship, so she has to learn how to cope with it and try to move on, and I thought this felt very realistic. I thought Okwu, who is one of these jellyfish aliens, was really interesting. This particular species is definitely warlike and pro-violence, but I liked seeing how Okwu ends up trying to protect Binti. I liked this university setting in general. I think it's full of diversity, you know, genders, species, etc., and it seems super imaginative, and obviously, like, I love this emphasis on math. So I think that this little, like, extra story that's included in here felt like a very nice inclusion. We get to see more of how she's been dealing with the aftermath of the first novella, and I think it does help develop her as a character more, and we do get to be introduced to some of the side characters that are kind of, like, mentioned later on in the book, and they kind of, like, reference some events, and that's what, like, this short story is meant to kind of show, and I thought that that was very nicely done. So, like, overall, in terms of the reading experience, I much preferred reading this as just like a complete collection rather than like the individual stories, and I thought it flowed nicer, I guess, and, you know, like, I did appreciate this extra short story. I think this first novella is probably still my favorite, but I do really like all of them. There are certainly some shocking things that happen in the third novella, but I do like how it wraps up, though I've heard that some people may not be satisfied with this ending, and, like, I get it, but that was also kind of, like, what I was wanting to happen, so I'm totally fine with it. I think this world is just so great. There's a space shrimp that's like a ship. Woo, trying to say that 5 times fast. Which I thought that was really fun. But yeah, like, I would definitely read more in this world and, you know, at this university in particular. But I thought this was fantastic, and I would definitely recommend it. The last book I'll talk about today is a 5-star read, and that's Veiled by Benedict Jacka. I think this is the 6th book in this Alex Vera series, and this is an adult urban fantasy series that's very much similar in tone to the Dresden Files. So we follow Alex, who is a diviner, and he gets a job with the Keepers enforcing magical law. And this is kind of like, you know, he's never really gotten along with like the council and these Keepers. He's like kind of forced into a situation where like he needs allies. He ends up obtaining this item that everybody wants and will kill for, and he ends up obviously being caught in the middle of all these people. I thought this was really fantastic. I definitely liked the plot of this particular book. We still get really great magic here that I feel like is kind of unique. Like, you know, Alex with his divining ability is basically like seeing probabilities of events, and I thought, you know, like that's kind of more mathematical again, I guess, but I really enjoy seeing that. We definitely get introduced to new people here, and some of these people can like essentially like manipulate flesh to make appearances look different. And this definitely gets into some of the darker themes in this book, like sex slavery and abuse, and there are some like underage kids that are involved in this plot, so, you know, content warnings for that. There's definitely some like really sad scenes that happen in terms of that particular plot line, but you know, as a whole, I thought that this was, you know, like a really interesting setting, and definitely like I was rooting for Alex to beat these people. I liked Alex and his friends. I'm glad that we got to spend more time with this character Caldera. She's an earth mage, I think, and so she's actually like kind of stout and like really strong, and I just really like her, and I'm super excited to see her. I'm assuming she'll come up more in later books. But she seems really cool, and I like how she helps Alex because, like, she knows that he's a good person overall. Despite some accusations that he's involved in some, like, shady shit, she is kind of like, no, I know who you are. Alex obviously continues to be great. I still like his magic, and definitely like how he is able to use his wits in order to kind of, like, survive and, you know, figure out what's going on. We do get some politics and scheming here with this council. There's a lot of manipulation happening and a lot of power plays. So I found this to be like pretty delightful and like really fun to unravel all of these plots. So yeah, I definitely really like this series. If you're a fan of the Dresden Files, I would definitely check this out. I am excited to keep going with the series. So those are the 10 books that I have to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, did you read Redwall books back in the day? And yeah, I only read a couple, I think. But I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.